All right, there we go. Now we're up. Now we're moving. This is good. Okay, back at it. Just kind of ticking through all the boxes. Give me 10 seconds, and then we'll be ready to go. I literally just walked in the door like 5 minutes ago, so forgive me if I'm still putting on lights and stuff. Just hang on. It's coming. I swear. Yep, be right there. Hang on. Okay, hang on. Hang on. Here I come. Here I come. All right. All right. All right. We ready for this? This one's going to be a good one tonight. I think you're really going to enjoy it. This one's going to be really good. Everything look. Yep. Okay. Cool. 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 Wow. Not bad for 5 minutes head start. All right. Let's get started. Here we go.
And now we'll see how good you are.
No matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world.
Ready to work.
So, yeah, here we are. Hi. Forgive the chaos and messiness of this. I literally just walked in the door right before we started firing this up. So let's just press the button, get everybody here, let everybody know what's going on, and then we'll get started tonight. Oh boy, howdy tonight. Hang on, I gotta flip this over, otherwise I'm gonna get distracted. Tonight I've got some really interesting stuff on rejection and poor sales. So really, what we're talking about tonight is if you're one of two cases, this is really going to help you. I mean, it'll help you no matter what, but I'm targeting specifically two groups of people. One, first group, the people who have been throwing, just yeeting their manuscript with a query letter out into the world, out into traditional publishing, and been met with harsh, frequent, seemingly constant rejection. Just like, that's all you get. Just rejection until the cows come home. That's group number one. Group number two. I want to talk to those people who were like, I don't want to have anything to do with traditional publishing. No, thank you. And they instead went to self-publishing, but thinking they were, getting some kind of great deal or saving themselves a great deal of grief. But it turns out once they posted their book to wherever they posted it, it's just not selling well. It's not selling well. It's not really doing great. Maybe it has reviews. Maybe it doesn't have reviews. Maybe it's just kind of there. And it needs to be and should be and could be doing better. Those are the two groups I'm primarily talking to tonight. If you are not in either of those groups, that's fine. Because this stuff, where is it? These things right here will absolutely help you not end up in one of those two groups, if that makes sense. So arguably, this is going to be good info for everybody. And I think it's probably easiest just to start, not really doing anything super fancy. I'm not terribly organized here, so forgive me if I have to look up and click and point out that tonight, just like the graphic says, here are 5 reasons you're getting rejected or selling poorly. Now, I want to make it clear that I'm not giving 10 tips. It's 5 things that happen to sort of sit in the intersection of that Venn diagram, that overlap, because the reason you're getting rejected for whatever book it is, and the reason you're not selling well, probably the same set of reasons, which means the same advice applies. We're going to break this down. Let me look at my notes here real quick. We've got, let's see, I've got 2 things specific to queries and pitching and 3 things specific to manuscript construction. So those are the 5 reasons primarily why people get rejected, or if they self-pub, sales aren't happening. These are fairly conceptually broad, but I'm going to try and break down each one of them just because that's the easiest way to do it. All right, here we go. Let's start with the first one. You've overwritten. All right, first of all, what the hell is overwriting? What does that even mean? Overwriting is it has a couple different definitions. Let's see if we can come up with a couple simple definitions. One, overwriting is just plain old too many words. You've blown way past your word count. And I'm not talking like your book is supposed to be 80,000 words and you've written 80,100. That's not what I'm talking about. There's always that wiggle room. There's always that latitude in terms of how many words a book should have. The recommended dose, the recommended size might be 80,000, 90,000, somewhere in a range of things, maybe 75 to 90, depending on what your book is. But it's really okay if you can, if you need a couple extra 100 words to wrap up, you can wiggle a couple 100 extra words. In 20 something years, I've only met about 6 high-end publishers who absolutely positively clamped down and said, no, word count is word count. Boot this person to the curb. There's always going to be that little bit of wiggle room. Don't freak out if you're like a smidge over 80,000. And if you're writing this and you're not sure how you're going to get to 80,000, it's also okay if you're a little under too. Word counts are not carved in stone. Word counts aren't even agreed on in terms of what people think each genre should have. But we treat word counts as though they're it's word count. It's this big thing in the heavens. It's not. It's a stupid number made up by some people a very long time ago, and nobody figured out how to change it, so they don't change it. So you've got a little wiggle room up and a little wiggle room down. But that's not the only example of overwriting. It's one of the clearest because you can definitely point to a manuscript that's too big when somebody's asked, how big's your thing? And they say something like, well, you got to understand. That's always a warning that there's a problem first. You got to understand there's, it's supposed to be whatever number it is. And then in reality, it turns out to be this much larger number. That's one kind of overwriting. Just too many words. Now, let's go look at a different kind of overwriting. How about a kind of overwriting where you've got the correct word count, if that's really important to you? Hint, it doesn't need to be, relax. But if you're within the word count range, let's suppose you've made the number, but how you have chosen to write things is particularly wordy. You are taking 10, 20% more words, 30%, 50% more words to say a thing than you could. You're just fattening up every sentence, fattening up every description. Everything is just weighed down with extra prepositional phrases, extra descriptors, extra punctuation. You're just taking the longest way possible to say whatever it is you're trying to say. Hang on. I do want to caution one thing here, because every time I start talking about, bloated writing and writing that's just got too many phrases and its sentences are too long and everything's just too complicated, the second I start talking about that, somebody somewhere gets the idea in their head that, oh God, I have to write in this hyper minimalist style. I have to use the least number of words. All right, come here. No. All right? No. You don't need to do that. This is not a matter of there's a correct number of words. That's not how this works. There is a difference, though, between writing effectively and detailing all you need to detail and getting across what you need to detail, and then doing that but taking more words to do it, complicating your sentences, creating more stuff that it's nice, but it doesn't really matter. This isn't only on a sentence by sentence level. This is also adding extra scenes, adding extra details to scenes, adding extra chapters, adding extra plot twists, just packing more stuff in the space that doesn't functionally serve the story. You've just got extra stuff. Oh, I'm going to add in, we're going to add kids, or we're going to jump time, or we're going to, add in an extra dog, or we're going to put a couple extra monsters in to fight. Like, these are all nice ideas conceptually, but where or how they attach to the story really matters. Because if your story is something straightforward, let's say, I don't know, it's the story of two kids who have to liberate their school from zombies. There's plenty of material there. You don't need to constantly keep adding in more stuff, trying to make that sound appealing. There's plenty of appeal there. Part of that comes from you trusting what you're writing and saying like, oh yeah, this is, we're not saying you've got to be arrogant about it or assume you're flawless, but you're allowed to like what you write, and you're allowed to produce what you want at the degree you want and put it out into the world. No one's saying, or no one thinks that you think you're perfect just because you're enjoying what you're writing and it's going well. You're allowed to like your stuff. And as a result, you are allowed to say as much or as little of it as you want. But sometimes when we go too far, we end up overwriting. Part of that is just disorganization. Part of that is poor decision making, not making enough effective choices as to what stays and what goes. So we're just going to keep throwing in. Part of it is also validation seeking. The idea of, well, I don't know if what I have so far is good, but if I add this in, it might be better. And if I add this in, I could add this in and this. And it's just this nervous anxiety where it's always easier to try and create something, do something, make something in order for your reader, who you have no idea who they might be, but you don't know what your reader will like. So if you keep offering things, what about this and what about this? And eventually, theoretically, you have to hit on a thing they like. That happens a lot. Like a staggering, like an upsetting number of authors I have worked with love to overwrite, primarily because they just can't decide. Here, look, we're going to explain this real straightforward. What the reader is looking for, and I don't care whether the reader is a consumer or whether the reader is a pimp or an editor or a publisher or a reviewer or whomever. I don't care who the reader is. What that reader is looking for is a story that engages them, that holds their interest, and a story that moves, that makes them feel something. Preferably more than one thing, and preferably in more than one spot. The story allows them to put a mental movie in their brain. And it stirs them emotionally. It makes them feel things. It allows them to believe or feel or imagine that these characters, whomever they might be, are somewhat realistic and somewhat able to be visualized. When I say realistic, I don't mean like grounded to earth. I mean like you could see them being real beings. That's what they're looking for. They're not looking for like the magic plot or the correct number of action scenes or the proper use of some I don't know. Like they need to know exactly how long a car chase is. Like readers aren't technical like that. Now, they might have an awareness of the technical motivations and process of writing. That's different. What I'm talking about is the idea that the reader has an expectation that it has to be a certain way. Oh my God, where is their secondary inciting incident? Burn this book, throw this thing out the window, never let them write again. None of that. None of that is what a writer or what a reader cares about. They just want a good story. They want to be entertained. How you manage to do that comes from an amalgam of things like organization, like skill, like talent, like luck. Some of these things you can control. Some of these things you only need to, the best you can do is put yourself in a situation where opportunity is available and it's a chance. But by and large, your job as a writer is just to produce that thing, whatever it is. Produce it to the best of your ability, and then make sure that through the entire course of you creating whatever it is you're creating, you don't overcomplicate things. You don't suddenly make this harder for you to create and harder for them to read. Remember, your goal is to entertain people with your stuff, to put a movie in their brain. That doesn't mean you're trying to get it perfect. That doesn't mean you're trying to get everything right. It just means you're trying to write the amount of stuff on the page that you think you need to write in order to tell the best story. Do not, underline that a couple times. Do not try and predict what you think the other person will like and try writing that. Do not try and anticipate their wants and then shoehorn that in. Don't do that. Just produce your best thing that makes you happy for you. And the reader will go along with it so long as it is well crafted, you demonstrate talent and skill, and your story holds their interest. Okay? I know that's easier said than done, but if you check out this or any other videos out there on my channel or on the stream or go grab the podcast audio feed, you'll get more tools in this toolbox. You can also always ask for help, and I'll be more than happy to help you. You just need to ask. But overwriting is a massive problem, generally indicative of just indecision and anxiety. Too much stuff. The reason why it leads to rejection, if you overwrite your query, let's walk through each step. If you overwrite your query is too long. Queries are short. They're supposed to be about no more than 300-ish words, and that's counting literally all the addressing and the contact info and all that stuff. 300 words, one side of one piece of paper, okay? That's a query letter. If you overwrite this thing with like a bajillion extra paragraphs and this, that, and the others, you've missed the boat on it. Write it again. That's overwriting your query. Super happens, mainly because, again, you got to learn when to pull back and what not to say in your query. Make some decisions. It's a query's job, if you're curious, a query's job is to just introduce the potential of a few ideas and create enough interest so that the person reading the query, whomever they might be, says, yeah, I want more information. I want to know more. I want to find out more. And the only place they can do that is if they go and read the manuscript. If you overwrite the manuscript, the story can be more complicated than it needs to be. It can be overwritten. It can just be crowded with descriptions and stuff that can be cut that doesn't hamper the plot at all. Like it doesn't radically ruin anything if we just slash out that scene where they buy a new car, because you don't need it. Just put them in a car. Overwriting in a manuscript is more common than overwriting in a query. We'll talk about query vagary later, but by and large, the issue is overwriting in text. How you control that, how you manage to get better at not doing that. One, confidence in what you're writing. Do it to the best of your ability. It doesn't have to be perfect. You're not trying to anticipate what somebody else likes. You are taking the picture in your head, whatever that picture is, whether it's a scene or an action or a description or whatever, taking the picture in your head, frozen as it might be, locked in whatever pause screen or loading screen it might be, and translating that into words on the page. Maybe that's a sentence. Maybe that's a paragraph. Maybe that's a chapter. Maybe that's a scene. I don't know what it is. Doesn't really matter what it is specifically. But the idea is that you're doing your best to translate this picture in as much accurate detail as possible, not necessarily a complete number of words. You're not trying to use every word in the English language to describe the thing in your head. You're just trying to qualify what it is enough so that another person can picture it more or less the way you've pictured it in your head. And then you've done that for literally everything in your story. That's the cure for overwriting. Mostly it's a practice issue. Mostly it's a sit down and figure it out kind of thing. It's a thing that happens. It's not if you're doing this, and any editor you talk to can spot it. If you're doing it, it just comes down to doing other revisions, make some decisions, cut some things out, slow down, take a deep breath, understand that you're doing your best, give yourself a little bit of credit, and then keep trying to streamline. And when you feel that urge to get wordy, pull back. That's overwriting. All right? Not the end of the world. Fixable. Almost always fixable. And unfortunately, the best solution is usually a full rewrite or a lot of inline cutting. Eliminate this phrase, cut this out, cut this out, cut this out. So you're eventually left with a manuscript that kind of collapses in on itself because you start making a lot of interior cuts, and then the whole thing shrinks once you pull out the excised text. It's common. It happens. It's what you deal with. Let's go on to the next one. Now, here's the other side of the coin. We talked about overwriting, where you've got too many things. Now we're going to cover the flip side, underdevelopment. This is what I was talking about before when we were talking about people who hear me talk about overwriting and then they jump too far back. They pull way, way, way back and they write in this really stark, gaunt, anorexic kind of the barest minimum number of words and the least amount of detail. It's just the plot. It's just the plot and just the critical stuff and just the necessary things so that you understand the main A plot of the story, and there's very little else described in terms of what the world's like or the setting's like or the time of day or the weather. It's just the most critical stuff, as if there's a spotlight on that and everything else sits in darkness. That's also a really common thing, especially when somebody's received feedback for the first time. And their response to feedback is, oh no, this is awful. I have to change everything about how I write and undo all this stuff. You don't. It's an understandable reaction. And, it's one of those things where you've grabbed a hot pan and then you jump back and you're hesitant and a little gun shy to go forward and do it again. But it's okay. Like it's really okay. You can have a few details as a treat. You can put a few things in. It's not the end of the world. You don't need to try and do this in the least amount of words or in the most stark description. Don't forget, the reader isn't just trying to follow you in terms of a checklist like, well, the character did this, here's 1, 2, 3, 4. They're not doing that. The reader wants a movie in their brain, which means you're going to need to describe things beyond just the iris of the spotlight you're putting on. They want the whole picture. So if you start excluding things because you're only describing the critical stuff that you want the reader to pay attention to, and you skimp on the other details, like they don't even come up in the manuscript at all. You don't really talk about time of day. You don't really talk about the location. You don't really describe anything to make the room feel real. Your story is suffering badly, and it's cumulative. The less and less you describe, the less and less the reader has a chance to develop an imagination or develop that mental movie, the worse their retention's going to be. Because if you focus them only on this little tight itty-bitty like sphere of your story and exclude the rest, they're not going to like it. Imagine put yourself in their place. If somebody handed you a book and said, oh, well, it's supposed to be this big, giant science fiction epic, but they never really got around to making it feel epic. They never really successfully translated the picture in their head onto the page. How would you feel as a reader? That's the same process every other reader is going through when they read your things. Underwriting is usually a reaction. It's usually a thing that happens after feedback or after somebody gets some bad internet advice or somebody freaks out and just decides that what they're doing needs to totally change because they're not somehow immediately getting some kind of benchmark for progress that really isn't a thing in the first place, but that never really stopped anybody from freaking out about it. So they only write the bare bones. They say things like, oh, I don't write description because I get bored reading descriptions. Can I just address that for a minute? To be more accurate with that, you don't get bored reading description. You get bored reading bad description. Because I guarantee you that if you read a thing or watched a thing that really engaged you, that you were really hype about, that you really enjoyed, you'd read description about it all goddamn day. Bad description, you glaze over because of how much work it might need to get better. So you then apply that rule to your own stuff or apply that assumption to everybody's stuff. And that's one of the ways you end up with a really starved story. Another way, I should say, where you end up underwriting is just a lack of familiarity with writing. You need to do more writing. You need to work on more drafts. You need to really push yourself to do more than just pass time slapping keys and really try to compose and organize a story. I see this a lot in work. I see this a lot with writers who kind of stayed in writing prompts and little hashtag contests and little stupid Discord things and little Facebook group tricks. And they stayed in that pool. They stayed in that little bubble of like, I'm comfortable here writing on a prompt every day. They stayed there too long. and they never really gave themselves the confidence to take the risk to go write that bigger, larger story. So when they do, they don't have a whole lot of self-confidence in it. They keep treating this big novel as though it's just one long prompt, and they're totally different animals. But they don't have enough ground beneath them. They don't have enough architecture to support them. So they just write how they know, which means they're reproducing that sort of undercooked, incomplete, not yet totally learned and mastered skill. You're doing what you do, and you're used to writing this one way, so you just keep doing, only you're going to do more of it. That's how you end up underdeveloped. The fix for this is to slow the hell down and plan out each scene. Yeah, plan it out. Think about it. Write it down. Picture it in your head. Act it out with Lego guys if you have to. Whatever it is you have to do. And then instead of only and specifically transcribing the actions taken as if we are reading a court transcript, detail the whole thing as though the reader is the camera seeing this, right? So here's the reader. I'm moving the camera. I'm the reader, and the reader's over here, and the reader's over there, and the reader's up, and the reader's down, because that's where you are directing the reader's attention. You need to direct the reader's attention. It's the opposite of overwriting, where you need to stop moving the reader so much and pare down what you're saying. Here, you have to do that. You have to move the reader. You have to engage them. You've got to say some words, describe some things. It does get better over time, whether that means multiple drafts or multiple attempts at drafts or multiple stories or whatever. This is a thing you can learn to do over time. You do get better at it. Just keep practicing. Let's go on to the next one. We've reached one of the query ones. I do like that stock photo. I added the interrobang and the question marks, but I just do like her face in this. All right, so now we're going to talk about just flat out being vague. In being vague is one of those things that's really hard to describe, but you're barely detailing things. You're barely saying anything. You're maybe giving one detail, one word, it makes sense to you because you wrote it, but it won't make sense to somebody else because they don't have the rest of the picture in your head. If we're talking about vagueness in your manuscript, it's just unclear what you're trying to say. Maybe the sentence mostly needs to be rewritten, or something needs to be repunctuated differently, or something just flat out needs to be expanded or removed. In a query letter, though, vagueness kills you. Flat out. You want to know why your query's getting rejected? I guarantee you there's some part of it that's vague. Now, vague doesn't mean like mysterious, like, oh, I'm not telling you this part because if I give this away, you won't read the book. That's not how this bullshit works. They need to read the book because they need to sell the book. So you being all coy or mysterious about the nature of a spoiler in your query letter is fucking stupid. Like, there's just no other way to say it. It's fucking dumb to think that the people who are going to publish your work want to be like surprised, like it's a TV watcher waiting for a season finale. You can spoil in a query. It's not even a spoiler. It's literally your job to make your book sound appealing so that somebody will give you money for it. The same is also true when it comes to just pitching your stuff. Being vague is not the same as demonstrating potential in a query, in a pitch. Anything you're doing, sales copy, anything you're doing to try and interest somebody in a thing you've written. Your goal, your task, your challenge is to sit there and suggest the potential of what you're talking about. And you're going to suggest that potential based on what you do describe and the degree to which you describe it. If you mean that the generational battle that, it is the time of the gathering and champions from all kingdoms come into one place to fight out who will be the next warlord. If that's your premise, if that's the thing of your story, if you skimp on one of those details because you're trying to make the thing sound mysterious, you are shooting yourself in the foot. You're just shooting yourself in the foot. If you can describe what it is you're saying, Make it sound as though you have more detail over there in the manuscript, but until then, you're just giving out a little. It's a cocktail before the entree. It's an amuse-bouche before the meal. It's a movie trailer before the film. You're not going to give everything away. You're not going to give the big stuff away. You're not going to hold, your big giant surprise reveal, whatever. But you're going to give enough, something, somewhere, a little bit here and a little bit there, and you're going to try and build your pitch or build your query around one set of details. One set of details. I know the thing has many. I know you've got all these different characters and all. I know. Just pick one set. Pick one idea. Pick one concept. I understand that your romance novel also has, elements of a thriller or elements of an action story. I know. But pick one way to talk about your story this time. In the same way that we can talk about dinner in terms of what the protein was, or we can talk about how large it was, or if it was hot or if it was cold. We can, whether it was seasoned correctly or poorly, or whether you bought it or whether you made it. We can find all these different ways to talk about dinner. We can compare it to other dinners. We can develop its strengths. We can develop its weaknesses. We can do all that stuff. But it still comes down to choosing one way to talk about it, because you can't talk about everything. We only have one side of one piece of paper, so you need to pick and choose what it is you're going to say and to what degree you're going to say it. And that's not vague. That's just making choices. If you were being vague, you'd say very little about a ton of things. And much like, this graphic, that face, her face, that's the face the reader would be making if the reader's trying to make a decision to say yes about your work, or yes to giving you a contract, or yes they want to buy it or give you money or anything like that. We don't want people to make that face. That's not a thing for us, okay? How we're going to get around that, how we're going to defeat vagary is, one, getting you to make more decisions. How do you want to talk about this work? What way, what angle, what vector are you going to take to talk about this story? I understand there's a lot of them. Just pick one, focus. When it comes to the manuscript, how are we going to eliminate vagueness? By being specific. If we're going to describe a thing a certain way and the description matters because it's important to the story, like you want to describe the monster that's chasing our teens all across the school, you want to be specific in that detail because they're the monster. We want to know what to picture in our heads. But the small details of inconsequential stuff, like, I don't know, the number of floor tiles in the room, in the wood shop, whether you get that number correct or not, doesn't ultimately matter to the story. That's the stuff you can afford to be vague on. The things that are incidental, the things that add atmosphere, you can be a little less specific about them because that will give you an opportunity to be specific about the things you want. Like the monster, like character details, like motivations, like dialogue, like how something is said, all that kind of stuff. Picking and choosing and learning when to pick and learning when to choose and learning the value of demonstrating potential versus being vague. Let's just give you an example because I know somebody somewhere is going to ask me for an example. Here's an example. Here's vague. Let me see. Here's vague. It was a hot summer night. Okay, it's not bad. Doesn't give me a whole lot of extra details. The degree of heat, the weather, the time, it's kind of sort of there. It's in the rough. It gives me a little bit of an idea. But I can be sharper. I can be more clear about this. If I use a couple different words, I can come up with something else. I can say, the seventh hottest night of the year was also the one where everything changed. All of a sudden now I've indicated more detail about the night, more detail about the temperature, more detail about the consequence and why this date matters. I'm not just saying it's a hot night and then going on to the next sentence. I'm combining details. That's seizing and developing on the potential of a thing. Because I know, especially in a query and especially in a pitch, my job isn't to educate you as to the nature of the book and give away all the secrets, which is some bullshit I saw on social media today. It's not about giving away your secrets. You're not special. This is a job. The plumber isn't giving away the secrets of the pipe when they turn the wrench. It's not about that. It's about demonstrating that you can talk about a thing in a way that makes it appealing to somebody else. So a lot of that's going to be word choice, and a lot of that's going to be presentation of words, the order in which the words or the ideas come and how they're punctuated and how you're dividing them and how you're focusing them. And that just comes down to practice. Writing a ton of different, I can't stress that enough, different queries and different pitches for our manuscript people, for our self-publishing people. Hi. For our self-publishing people, the recourse here is much like before, picking and choosing what you want to double down on, triple down on for detail, because you can't do it for everything, because that's how you end up overwriting, and you can't do it for nothing. That's how you underdevelop. But it's picking and choosing your spots, picking and choosing, okay, I'm going to put a little extra detail here now because I want to hit this atmosphere or describe this emotion, or I want to put a little extra on this action because I need the reader to understand the logistics and mechanics of what happened and who put their hands where. Pick and choose, which means making decisions, which means slowing it down in your head and really thinking about what you want the reader to picture and to what degree you want them to picture it. I really can't stress that enough. We're going to keep saying that a lot for like the next half hour or so, where it's just going to be over and over. Make decisions. What do you want to say? Slow it down in your head. Way too many writers who are in the throes of heavy-duty rejection, their primary problem is they're flying. They're racing. I don't know if they're trying to race towards the end to get it done, or if they're racing because they think that's where the money shows up. It doesn't. Or if they're racing because they just don't know what else to do, so they're trying to like show off how much they can get done. None of that's any good. None of that's any good. None of that's what you need to do. That's not even what you need to worry about. But here we are all the same. Here we are sweating this thing. And we don't really need to. We don't need to. What you want to do is, as we've talked about in other streams, particularly in Every Sentence is a Camera, let's just summarize that. You want to grab the reader by the face, just like this. Or the way I learned it, you know how you have that one like aunt or family member who grabs you by the cheeks when they see you and they give you that weird pinch that makes your cheeks red and it's really awkward and strange? You want to grab the reader at about the face, somewhere in the face. If you're watching the video, I'm grabbing the side of my head. And then you are going to steer this reader's face, particularly their eyes, to whatever degree, to whatever height, to whatever closeness, to whatever distance, to whatever angle, wherever you want. You're going to focus them on a detail. So for me, I'm looking at, the microphone, and I'm close or I'm far or I'm here or I'm there. And what the reader sees is what's the sentence on the page. Every sentence is a camera. And every camera is based on what you want the reader to see. So if you need the reader to be like at the way back end of the room because you want them to see the whole big size of everything, then you need to put the reader there. But I can guarantee you're probably not going to want to leave the reader at the back end of the room the entire time, because you're going to want to zoom them all the way in and get them super nice and close to everything and then pull them all the way back. You are in charge. You are in charge. You are in charge of what the reader sees in their mental movie. Which means if you're trying to translate your stuff to them, slow down what you're thinking about. Take your time. And then translate it. Get it across. Sometimes you'll fly right through a thing because it's not a big deal because you don't need the reader to focus on it, i.e., John drove to the grocery store. Other times you're going to want to detail it because we need to focus on what happens while driving to the grocery store. Pick and choose, but you can't do that without first slowing down. Okay? Vague kills. Potential, especially for pitches and queries, helps. And it's not as fine a line as I'm making it sound. Vague is lacking detail. Potential is indicating there is detail, but you can only get it if you go to the manuscript. It's more open-ended. Vague is a closed-off thing. It's night. That's vague. It's a hot summer night. It's a little less vague, but it suggests more potential. This comes down to really picking and choosing what you're trying to say. Take your time. Don't rush. It's going to be fine. Let's go on to the next one. You've got no hook. This is mostly for my query and pitch people, but this also applies to manuscripts because a hook is a thing, a concept, a story element, a notion, an idea, some element of the thing, the architecture of the story that is appealing to somebody else. When you talk about your book, I don't care what book it is, whether it's your kid's book, your picture book, the romance novel, the epic fantasy, the science fiction, the space opera, whatever the hell it is you're writing, your book. When you're talking about it, you need to be incredibly conscious of your hooks. There's no other way to say it. If you can't figure out how to detail your story in an interesting way to someone who does not have the same information in their head that you have in yours, you're not going to get the reception you want. You've got to be able to make your story sound interesting and appealing. It's not going to be interesting and appealing if you just name check characters and broadly and tepidly describe something about those characters. Calling him Prince Montefort doesn't mean anything. You might have a full picture of like a Disney prince or something in your head, but you failed to detail that in just naming him Prince Montefort. You're always going to have more information than the person reading whatever it is you're writing because you wrote it. You know what you meant, but you need to get that across to the other person. Without a hook, when you're just recounting, well, this happens, or if you describe it in very unengaging terms, let's see. This is the love story of two people from two different families who find out that they can't fall in love, yet they do. Now, one, I exaggerated that for the sake of the example. But two, that's West Side Story, Romeo and Juliet, the basis of a majority of hetero romance novel structure. Two people who can't get together end up getting together. Problems ensue. If you just roll it out like it's no big thing, like, well, that's the story. Why should someone else care about that? Why would that be a thing? Why does that matter? You've got to hook the reader. You've got to grab their attention. When we talk about this on a manuscript level, we're talking about your opening pages, for instance, where you need to grab their attention and hold their attention. That doesn't mean start off with like a Michael Bay explosion. You can, but it's not necessary. But it doesn't mean doing something big and grandiose and then setting an unreasonable expectation about how the rest of the book's going to be. It just means whatever you're starting with, whatever you're focusing on, you're holding, it's interesting. It's holding their attention. You've decided, we're going to start at this moment in the story. We're going to start with this in process. We're going to share this thought with the character. We're going to give the reader this thing to picture first. That'll be something they're not expecting. That'll be something interesting for them. It'll be something detailed for them. That's a good way to start. If you don't do that, though, if you skip that for whatever reason, what you end up doing overall is creating a story that you wrote, but it never really grabs the reader and holds their attention. No matter how much you big it up in your enthusiasm with exclamation points and emoji and lols and all that stuff, none of that's going to translate over. You can be super hyped for your story, but if you don't describe it in a way that engages, it's unreasonable to expect that anything out of pity, people will care. So think about how you're talking about your work. Don't just recap the plot. It's the story of a guy who goes on a quest to throw jewelry in a volcano. Yeah, I mean, it is, but maybe we could make it sound like it's something I want to read. Maybe we want to make it sound like something that you give a shit about. Rather than, or come the other way. Oh my God, it's the story with 6 guys and 10 of these things and 45 of those things. And now you're just inundating the reader. Slow down, focus on one thing, and drive forward from it. Can one of the hooks be the original idea that you had, the original idea you had to prompt you writing the thing? Yeah, totally. Totally. if you're able to like express it at some point, you can talk about the original idea. Anything that allows you to like connect with the person doing the reading of whatever you've written, whether that's your pimp or a publisher directly or an editor or just a straight consumer, anything that makes that person pay a little bit more attention, care a little bit, think a thing, respond or react in some way is a hook. Stating 10 facts. Well, there's this guy and he does this thing, and then that other guy comes and does this thing, and then this lady shows up and she does this thing. A statement of facts is less engaging than taking fewer facts and putting them together in a way that's evocative, both in manuscript, scene construction, chapter construction, act construction, but also in pitches and queries, especially in a pitch where things, you only have hooks. Pitches are generally short, 1 to 3 sentences. And they need to be effective. They need to be grabbing. So that's where you start to prioritize your word choice. You start to prioritize your verbs. You start to prioritize it. Probably everybody's first move when they make a pitch is they frame things as a question, because that's how you can naturally get a response from someone. We just learned that from existing. But once you're sort of familiar with shaping things into questions, can 2 people from 2 warring families find love? That's not bad. It's okay. You can get a lot of mileage out of framing things and hooks in terms of questions. But when you're ready to jump past that, when you're ready to kind of step up a level and take the training wheels off, you need to start thinking about the nature of the things that are forming that question and how you can frame them as individual sentences, and then how you can partner those sentences together to make your whole pitch. Now, it doesn't have to be whole sentences, but even if you put it as components in a single sentence, that's fine. But in terms of being vague, you're really making it infinitely harder on yourself. Be specific, be clear, keep talking. And eventually, if you keep writing pitches and keep writing queries, you'll brute force your way to understanding the idea of like, okay, when I talk about A, I get a little bit of response. When I talk about B, I get more response. And C is kind of, I like C, but I'm not sure. So maybe if I take B and C and put them together and less A, I'll find my way. Everybody's route through engagement is different. That's why there are, a million grifters out there telling you that you can do 10 different things to, of course, buy their course and get this done. But everybody's route through engagement is going to be different. And it comes down to understanding what it is you're trying to do and then finding the words and the tools you already have to do it and then giving you tools to supplement. If you can already do a few things, there's no reason to go all the way back to the beginning stuff if you want to work on your fundamentals. You can be met where you are by somebody who gives a shit, who will help you. Don't be vague. On to the next. We covered hooks already. Are we on the last one already? Holy shit, we're on the last one already? Flying. You're not saying anything. Okay. This one's going to take a little bit of explaining. So you can write a whole story. You can write 80, 90, 100, over 100,000 words. You can write 200,000 words. You could write a series. You could write a trilogy. You could write 55 books in a series. You could write a ton and say nothing. Because when we talk about saying things in writing, we're not just talking about the completion of a story. We're not just talking about, characters went from point A to point B and accomplished these things. We're not just describing like, this character, he can turn into chickens and he fell in love with a lady who doesn't eat chicken or something. Like it, you can accomplish a lot. You can put many words to many pages. You can put many ideas down and feel like, oh my God, I'm going to be an author. But if you're failing to say anything, you are essentially just creative writing like you were in school, like you were when you were younger. You've got to be able to say something, and that means a couple things. One, you need to know what your theme is. Hopefully you have a theme, and hopefully you have more than one theme. A theme, if you're not sure what that is is a lesson, an idea, a concept that the reader can cite your book as an example of. So maybe your lesson is stand up to bullies, or always do the right thing, or never compromise your morals for money, or cheaters never prosper except when they do because of capitalism. I don't know. Whatever your theme is, have one. If you don't know how to find your theme, if you're totally unsure you have one, here's the formula for finding your theme. What's your story about? What's it about? It's a love story between two people. It's a sci-fi epic where a weird farm kid learns from a space wizard about how to shoot things. Or it's the story of two small people who hurl jewelry in volcanoes for kicks. Whatever. It's the story of three guys with swords who are left completely unsupervised in France. Whatever. Figure out what your story is about. And then figure out what kind of lessons your story teaches. If you can't find what kind of lessons your story teaches, you need to probably rewrite something at some point to figure out what kind of ideas your story is an example of. It's not just an example of science fiction. It's not just an example of a romance novel. It needs a theme. The reader needs to look at their life and look at your book and go, this book is an example of a lesson I need to learn. It's an example of a lesson that resonates with me. If your reader can't do that, it's not their fault. You sucked at putting it in there. I don't know how else to tell you this. Far too many rejections, far too many, if not the vast majority, happen independent of the complexity of text and happen primarily because despite it being a nice story, it doesn't have any theme. There's no substance to it. Things like theme and subtext, we're going to talk about subtext in a second. Things like theme and subtext add depth to a story. It's not about the complexity of the plot. It's not about the wild, crazy lore. And, oh, by the way, we're going to explore this in 15 books from now, and there's going to be a wiki, and there's going to be this and that. And no, none of that, please. Theme is what helps staple all your story together, helps glue it in there so that things feel like they matter, because there's always a lesson the reader can take away. It's not just an example of this is how you write a dialogue scene. It's because in that dialogue scene, the person is learning to forgive somebody else. So this is an example of forgiveness. Subtext is a little harder to explain because we can't always directly point to it. Subtext is text beneath the surface. That's what it means. What that really translates into English, it's what you're saying without outright saying it in the text. It's implication. It's meaning without origination. We're talking about, we're not saying X in particular, but we're pretty much contextually discussing X. Subtext requires organization. You're not going to stumble your way into subtext just by saying that two fantasy characters clashed swords on a battlefield. You've got to have some merit to it, some context to it. Subtext is derived when a thing, whatever it is, can have an extra meaning beyond its literal meaning. So your two knights on the battlefield clanging and banging swords, that's their literal definition. Those are knights, those are swords, they clang and they bang. But if we understand that one knight is, pure and virtuous and good, and the other knight is, corrupted and evil and dead inside, whether that's metaphorically or not. But if we are able to point out what these two knights represent, then the idea that this fight isn't just two dudes clanging and banging, it's, the embodiment of good and purity in the story and the embodiment of evil in our story clashing. That's the subtext. We're able to look at a thing that has one meaning and develop a supportive secondary, tertiary, quaternary, whatever, other kind of meaning to it. Where's my camera? We're over here. Other kind of meaning to it. And that means you got to sit there and plan it. When you're writing these scenes where you want to demonstrate that your pure and virtuous super knight is pure and virtuous, Make sure that's in there. Make sure that hits the page. Make sure you talk about that in your pitch or in your query. When you want to make sure that the evil knight is really evil, make sure that hits the page. Make sure that ends up in your query. Make sure that ends up in your pitch. So that later in the climax of the story at chapter 35, when these two heroes, these two characters finally clash and clang and bang, we're able to not only root for our good and virtuous knight to overcome the evil guy, but we can see that the good and virtuous knight also represents more than just a character who has been knighted, who happens to have a big-ass sword. It's a representation of something greater. That's subtext. Lacking subtext means your story feels like one of those Easter bunnies that's real hollow. You can bite into it and stuff, but it's airspace in between. It's not solid chocolate. You're being robbed of the deliciousness of the depth of story. That's what happens when you're devoid of subtext. You're giving everybody hollow, crappy Easter candy. Or if you're using like the Halloween example, a lack of subtext is the family on the street that would give out pennies or toothbrushes. You know how unsatisfying that shit is? That's what happens when you lack subtext in your story. When there's no depth there, you're handing out toothbrushes on Halloween. Like, we get it. You're making a point. It's a story. It's a thing, but it's shit, and you could do better. Do not dismiss the value of subtext or theme. Most of the time, if your query has potential, but your manuscript lacks a theme, that manuscript, and therefore that query, are getting rejected. If you're close, if you're in the ballpark, but it would take a little bit of work to get there, what you're really looking for, or what you'll probably get as a result, is what's called an R&R, revise and resubmit, meaning, hey, make some changes. Maybe, hopefully you get notes. Hopefully you do, but you don't always, because why would someone want to help you succeed? That's ridiculous. But maybe you get notes, and maybe you're told what to revise and how to revise it, and then you go revise it and you resubmit it and you see what happens. But by and large, publishers, especially traditional publishers, are desperate for theme. They're desperate for subtext, because so many very rejectable, very forgettable, very disposable stories lack that depth. You can have the most complex lore in your science fiction, but if it's ultimately forgettable and it doesn't seem to stick in my head and it doesn't make an impression, it doesn't matter if you spent 8 months, becoming a field expert on the nature of tachyons. What matters is how you're able to affect and move the reader. If you're not saying anything, the easiest way to learn how to say something is to get very clear on what it is you're intending to do and then practice the shit out of it. And I don't just mean like, I'm going to be an author, so I'm going to write a lot of books. That's nice, but that's not what I'm talking about. I mean, like, if you're trying to tell a story about how much it sucks to have your heart broken, then you communicate that in your story. You talk about that heartbreak. You take a stance. You make a decision. If you're trying to talk about the enormity of time and space and how one person can feel dwarfed when they look at pictures from different planets and whatever else, then you describe that feeling in your text. You take a stance. If you want to talk about the brutality of society or the destruction of capitalism, or how traditional publishing is an environmental just disaster waiting to happen because people have an unfair insistence on creating a physical product even though it's destroying the planet, then you goddamn say something. You make a point. You say something. You're allowed to. It's okay. You're not just supposed to tell a happy story about two people who fall in love. Have something to say about it. What are you trying to say about romance? What are you trying to say about the nature of humanity? What do you mean? Why should this matter? These are the things that traditional publishers are looking for, and these are the things that readers are looking for when it comes time to leave reviews. Because the reason you're not selling well in these cases is because your story's nice, but it's meh, it's disposable. It's okay, like, all right, it's fine. Here's 3 stars, whatever. And granted, if you're looking for 3 stars, if you're just looking for, like, give me a C average and let me graduate school and just let me get by, great. This is totally how you can do it. Just crank out story after story that's well crafted and technically sound, but a little bit empty on the inside. Nothing wrong with that. There are loads of people who have made a career for years doing that. But if you're really trying to make that impression, you're really trying to be one of those big names when we talk about authors who we refer to solely by last names, then you're going to need to master theme and subtext. You're going to need to be able to say something. And that means you're going to also need to be able to say something, and then when people respond to it, like, I don't know, let's say you put gay people in Star Wars. You're going to need to be able to stand there and weather the horse shit of people who got real cranky that, oh my God, I think those two people touched each other. Like, you're going to need to be able to deal with those things. So take a stand. A lot of writers hold back. A lot of writers choose to not do that. Why? I think they're afraid of rejection. I think they're afraid of screwing it up and doing it wrong. Better to do it wrong and learn how to do it better than not do it at all because you were afraid of the response, right? If you've written in a draft and you're not sure there's a theme in the editing and revising process, pre-submission or pre-posting up for sale, go get somebody to look at it. Ask them. Ask your beta readers. Ask your editor. Ask your writing coach. Ask your critique group, whomever. Ask some human beings. What do you think my theme is? It's okay if you don't know. You're finding out. But over time, you need to be able to, when you talk about your work, identify a theme. That's 5 things. Well, how much time we got? I flew through this. It's barely an hour. That's fantastic. 5 things. 5 reasons you're not selling well. 5 reasons you're getting rejected. You're overwriting, fattening up the story with details of stuff you don't really need. You're underdeveloping. You're pulling way too far back and barely saying anything so that there's a very starved, incomplete picture for the reader to picture. You know what you meant, but you didn't put it on the page. You don't have a hook. You're not creating or describing anything in an engaging way to keep the reader's attention. You're being vague. You're saying stuff, but it's really unclear, so the depth and clarity of that picture in your head isn't making it to the page, isn't making it to the query, isn't making it to the pitch. Or, lastly, you're not saying anything. You've done all this writing, you've done all this talking, but you didn't really make any points. You didn't really address any ideas. You didn't speak to any challenges. You didn't give us a lesson to learn or a moral or a theme. The story was busy and active, but pretty forgettable, like any number of movies I can put on cable at like 10 o'clock at night. It's nice, whatever, but I'm going to forget about it in 2 hours. Like Terminator Dark Fate, which I just watched for Patreon. I know I watched it, but if you were to ask me to like detail anything beyond like, hey, they blew that one kid up at 16 minutes in, it's pretty disposable to me. You don't want to have that be your case, right? You're not trying to write disposable on purpose stuff, right? So to get better at this and do better with this, you're going to want to get better at drafting. You want to get better at organizing your ideas. To do that most effectively, slow down, take your time. It is better to overwrite in the drafting stages and then learn to pull back in the course of revision and then go get professional help with an editor or a coach to help tailor and perfect it. But it's better to put it all on the page and get it all out of there and have like a ridiculous word count that you're going to have to trim down than it is to try and say, I've got to stay within this box. I've got to stay within 80,000 words. Oh my God, I've added extra pressure on myself. To skip that, to avoid that, when you're drafting, fuck word count. No one gives a shit. That's a down the road publication, production later issue. If you're still in the drafting phase, just get it out of your head and put it on the page. I don't care if it's your first draft. I don't care if it's your 90th draft. Nobody cares what number draft it is. But get the picture in full in what K are we up to now? Like 12K monitors, 8K monitors, whatever. Get the picture in whatever K and whatever level of Dolby Atmos environmental sound. Get it all out. Get the movie out of your head and onto the page. Practice that, detail that, learn the fundamentals, learn the basics, keep doing it over and over for the course of the book. I don't care if it's supposed to be 90,000 words and you have 400,000. That can be fixed. We can do something with that. You can learn what to do with that. But if you fail to get the movie from here to the page, it won't matter how big or how small it is. Slow down, take your time, organize things. Plan this stuff out. We are not in the fucking around business. None of this is the fucking around business. We're trying to get this book published. We're trying to sell this book. We're trying to make some money. We're trying to have a career. What about any part of that suggests fucking around to you? That time is over and done with. We left that behind. This is a job. We're doing a job now. So treat it like that. Get better at the skills, get better at the fundamentals. You'll have an easier time with this going forward. Okay? That's the best advice. Keep writing, keep practicing, and get help when you need it. I can't stress that enough. These are not problems you can fix on your own. I mean, eventually, yeah, I suppose if you give enough monkeys typewriters, they'll write Macbeth. And if you give a writer a long enough timeline and you tell them what the problem is, they'll brute force their way to a solution. But if you really want to take a step forward and you really want to do something about it and you really want to stop getting rejected and you really want to start selling better, then by all means, avail yourself of people, writing coaches, freelance editors, who can help you, who can help make your stuff better, who can teach you those tools you need for your toolbox to help you be that better writer. That's what I have for you tonight. I want to thank you all for being here. Let's go look at the brand new closing screen. By the way, down here at the bottom, I don't know if you can see it. You can support this and everything else like it by going to patreon.com/JohnHelpsYouWriteBetter. Of course, all streams will eventually make their way to YouTube, but you can always catch streams out on twitch.tv/JohnHelpsYouWriteBetter. Or now, let's say you want to get some individual help for what you're doing. You want to keep, making all the stuff you're making and you want to do it better. You want to get that help we talked about. You want to not go through these 5 issues. Jump over to johnhelpsyouwritebetter.com. And if you scroll down a little bit, you'll get a chance to book a free appointment that will get you started on writing better and doing better. I want to thank everybody for being here. The next time I will see you is this week on July the 20th. That's this coming Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. I'll see you right back here for the Writer's Chat. Thanks so much for being here tonight. Take care of yourselves, and I will talk to you very, very soon. See ya.